Welcome, everybody, to this Emerging Scholars Network conversation. My name is Bob Truby, and I serve as the Emerging Scholars Network's National Director. And I've been looking forward to this conversation about a very creative new book called Dawn that weaves together cosmology, evolution, and the Creator's redemptive purpose into an eyewitness narrative. In doing so, the three authors who are with us today give us a seamless account of science and biblical revelation that see these as one story rather than two or more stories in conflict. Before we begin, let me just orient us to a little bit about our time together. We will be recording today's conversation. If you prefer not to be recorded or photographed, please keep your mic muted and disable your video by continuing to participate in the ESN conversation. With your video and/or audio enabled after the recording begins, you consent to allow InterVarsity to use the recording and any screenshots of our conversation for InterVarsity ministry purposes, including posting a video recording online for asynchronous viewing. I will stop our recording now. To allow you to disable your video. Your audio should already be muted if you prefer not to be recorded. And it's my pleasure to introduce Andy Walsh, who's going to lead our interview today. Andy is the Chief Science Officer at Health Monitoring. He has over a decade of experience analyzing electronic healthcare for infectious and non-infectious disease concerns, mass gathering preparedness, and healthcare policy questions. He regularly writes on science and faith for ESN's blog, Science Corner. In addition to writing for ESN, his novel, Faith Across the Multiverse, explores concepts from contemporary science to reveal more about God. So we're very excited to have Andy do this interview today as somebody who really is very much in some of the similar space to our three authors who are joining us, and he's going to introduce them.
Hi, thanks for that introduction, Bob. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And thanks to our guests, our authors, for being a part of this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are coming to us from around the world.
Evening.
Yes, evening for them and morning and afternoon for other folks, presumably. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of them in turn. And as a icebreaker, once I introduce you, if you want to say hi, and since your book ends with a debate about pizza toppings, if you want to share with us your favorite pizza toppings after I introduce you to get this conversation started, that'd be great. So first, going in order of the cover billing, we have Kees Dekker, who is the Royal Academy Professor and Distinguished University Professor at Delft University of Technology. Trained as a physicist, he pioneered nanotechnology with world-leading discoveries on carbon nanotubes in the 1990s, but since then moved to nanobiology. His current research ranges from nanopore sequencing to chromosome biology and synthetic cells. He's also an evangelical Christian who serves as a worship leader in his church. Welcome, Kees.
Yeah.
Hi to the folks.
So, hi. And so you want to know my pizza topping? Well,
Sure.
I also end up with very traditional salami stuff. So I'm pretty boring in that respect, but maybe less boring in others.
Can't beat a classic. Next up, we have with us Corinne Orania. She's a novelist and theologian who has written over 100 books and has won literary prizes for Christian children's literature. She writes for the Dutch Bible Society and for Christian magazines. She leads creative writing workshops and is involved in ministry in the Dutch Reformed Church. Welcome, Corinne.
Corinne, and well, I like my cheese, Gouda cheese, of course.
Excellent. And finally, we have Gijsbert van den Brink, who holds the research chair in University Research Chair in Theology and Science at the Vrije University Amsterdam. He was previously a minister in the Dutch Reformed Church. His research focused on the interface between Christian theology and evolutionary theory and the nature of theology as an academic discipline. His research interest is currently shifting towards theology in the Anthropocene and climate change. Welcome, Gijsbert. Say hi.
Thank you. So I love pizza Hawaii most. So I think that's pineapple and ham, isn't it?
Ooh, that is pineapple and ham. That is one of my daughter's favorite options as well. So you're in a safe space to share that. It's always controversial, but all good here. All right, well, welcome all of you. We're so glad to be having this conversation. This is a really great book, and since we don't have a lot of time, I just want to get into giving you guys a chance to talk about it.
Sure.
So first of all, this is a novel with an unusual narrator, a proton named Pro. What can you guys tell me about the casting process for that role? Did you send out notices to all the standard model particles? How did you decide what kind of personality a proton has? Tell us a little bit about that process.
Of course, it's a very original narrator, and we came up with this because we had this plan to tell the big story from the dawn of creation, which happened sort of the first we know about it is like from the Big Bang, and then to the cosmology of star formation and biological life and all that. But we want to have a narrator. We did not like to have like an external descriptor, but we want to have a particular narrator there. And that is difficult, right? Because humans were not around at that time. So what do? We were discussing angels or something like that. And at some point, the idea came up to do a proton. And the reason is actually a proton is a particle with a very long lifetime. Actually, the lifetime is longer than the age of the universe, unlike free neutrons or other subatomic particles. So we thought it actually is a very relevant and possible narrator, because that particle is created just a second after the Big Bang. And then he sees it all.
Yeah, and a lot of big histories have this all-knowing perspective of a well, and that makes it much more distant. We wanted to have a main character who experiences everything for themselves. So
Right.
I think this proton worked very well.
Great. So that tells us a little bit about the narrator. Of course, as an author, you can't choose your readers, but you usually have some sense of who you expect to be reading your book or who you're trying to target for. What kind of cast of readers did you have in mind, or who would you like to see reading this book?
Well, I think a very wide potential audience in that so many books which are being written on science and religion or faith and science have a very specific audience in mind of people who have a college or university degrees and have a certain interest in the theme, but there are many more people who have an interest in the theme. For example, people who have a practical education, who didn't go to college or to high school. They did go to high school, didn't go to college because they just wanted to train for a job, but still they see themselves confronted with many questions regarding the origin of the world. If they are Christians, they will have to make up their mind about evolutionary theory, for example. And so we wanted to be able to grasp and that's why I may have an audience which is a bit wider than the usual audience for more regular books in the field, and that's important because these people, if you have only practical education, you may find it very difficult to make up your mind about how to bring faith and science together, even more so than we have a theoretical training. So we hope to help a wide swath of a group of people here.
It links also to the aim that we have, that we want to present one coherent story, one coherent big story, because many people experience a sort of conflict between the big story of science and the big story of the Bible. And we wanted to integrate that and present one story because we feel there's one world and one creator, and it's all one story. And we wanted to narrate that.
And also, I think the three of us all met young people who struggled really with faith and science, and always learned at school and in church that God has made this earth in 6 days, about 6,000 years ago. And then when they go to high school or university, they are learning all about the Big Bang and evolution, and they think this is true, but if I accept it, I lose Jesus, and we wanted to help those people too, and also people my age. I always was try to avoid questions about creation and evolution, because I also was afraid to lose my faith till I met Kees. Read his books, of course.
Excellent. So a wide audience, especially including non-experts of all ages. Great. And you talked about the big scope of the story. And it's one big story that covers 14 billion years approximately, in only 150 pages, which I think might be some kind of record for narrative pacing. So obviously you're going to have to pick and choose some things, right? You can't detail every moment of all those billions of years. What were your priorities when you were thinking about what to include or what to exclude in your big story?
Yeah, I'd say we want to narrate the big story. So there's big elements of the material world that we know, the formation of stars, the formation of galaxies, the origin of life, the evolution of life. But at the same time, there's also big central moments, key moments of the biblical story, the creation, the fall, Jesus' incarnation, the cross, the resurrection. Those elements, I mean, it's a very quick list, but that's sort of what set the scope. Yeah.
Those are big steps, but when you look at Genesis 1, it's just one chapter, and actually just one sentence: God created heavens and earth. And we wanted to tell more about what happened at the Big Bang and afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, we may also have skipped some important thresholds in history, for example, the scientific revolution. But then in the very final chapter of the book, we have a brief discussion between the main protagonists of the book. And then the scientific revolution is mentioned in a sort of retrospective. So we had to make choices, of course, but I think we wanted to have the main thresholds both from a universal and from a Christian perspective represented in the book.
And also you have to realize, I mean, it cannot be a linear timescale, right? Because if you would cast those 14 billion years into 200 pages of a book, I mean, mankind will only appear in the last half sentence of the book or something, and the rest will be somewhat boring, a long time waiting there in the beginning, right? So you have to make a logarithmic scale of time there rather than a linear one.
Right, you have 100 pages before even the planet Earth exists.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So I mean, there's certainly you hit a lot of things and packed a lot into those pages. So let's get into some of the details a little bit more.
Sure.
One of the things that stood out to me from the early chapters was he returned to the idea of fine tuning several times. And of course, while this is a work of fiction, there's lots of real science and real history and real theology in the book. And fine tuning is one of those ideas. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that idea is and where it comes from?
Yeah, Gijsbert, do you want to say about it? I can say something about it.
Okay, so yeah, this was discovered actually back in the 70s of the former century, that some 14 or so parameters, physical parameters, which determine the shape of the universe, are very precisely attuned to each other. And if one of these parameters would be only slightly different, there was no life at all possible. So this is also sometimes called the entropic principle, a bit of a strange name. And scholars and scientists of whatever background or view of life had to come to terms with that fact. And it was, especially for atheists, it was a bit difficult to do that because it seemed so clear that somehow the universe was made towards the production of life. And in the telling which we do in the narrative, we try to show that, and we try to point to various things which play a role here, various particles and the way in which they, for example, you have billions of quarks and then anti-quarks, and only is a slight difference in amount of the quarks, which is larger than the anti-quarks. And that's the way it went about. So perhaps Kees can tell more in a more detailed way.
Well, yeah, there's lots of things. The resonance in the carbon, energy levels, that that help nuclear fusion of helium, the expansion of the universe, which has to be fine-tuned so that the universe is not too dilute and not too dense, so that it will recollapse again. Many things like that. There's scientific elements. There's known facts there that are part of what we discovered with science, which indeed are remarkable. And then you at the meta level, you have to account for that. And actually, it's pretty hard from an atheistic point of view to attribute all that to pure chance. Yeah, so we integrated this in a natural way in our story.
Yeah, I think it works very well. It comes up at different times in that narrative when those different balances become important to the sequence of events. And then as the story goes on, eventually humans show up on the scene. And at least from Pearl's perspective, things get messier, right? He doesn't talk about fine tuning as much, and he seems to be a little bit more disappointed about the choices that the humans are making. Do you think that that's a matter of his limited perspective? Is there a point at which fine tuning stops applying in the history of the cosmos? Or how should we think about that sort of shift in the narrative, or the shift in the perspective there?
Well, from the point of a writer, Proton really has a limited perspective. He doesn't know the Bible. He finds out along the way, and I think he is getting his hopes up when he sees a universe evolving, when he sees life evolving. But he doesn't know much about God's plans. So when he sees a dinosaur, he thinks maybe this is the creature God has in mind. And then this is the creature God can have this special relationship with. And then there's this big meteorite from space and everything is annihilated. And so he's getting worried. So that is his limited perspective.
He's only a proton, right? Like we are only human.
Yeah, but I like your observation, Andy. I think there is something in it that when the humans when the human comes on the scene, then things become slightly different, and that has to do perhaps with the fact that freedom is going to play a role now. So human behavior is different from particle behavior, right? And I think we try to do justice to what human freedom means, even to the creator. And you see Proton becoming desperate at various stages about whether the plans of the creator will succeed at all. And that has to do with the enormous scope which has been lended to human freedom and autonomy in a sense. So that may explain the shifting in the course of the story.
Yeah, and I think his concerns, and not surprisingly, since it's still written by humans, but his concerns are the kinds of questions and concerns that I think people have too about events over time. Yeah. So eventually, in the course of the story, humans do show up. We get some additional characters in the book, even though we don't get their perspective per se. The first people that we meet would probably be thought of as connecting to Adam and Eve, from since we're getting into the biblical narrative, they seem to play the role of Adam and Eve, but they have different names, and their story is a little bit different from what might be familiar from Genesis or from Sunday school storybooks and so forth. What can you tell us about where those names come from, the significance of those names, and why you chose to provide a little bit different take on that narrative?
Yeah, the names mean actually, like Adam and Eve, mankind and life. They're African names. We chose that on purpose because from the science, we know that the origins of mankind lies in Africa. The early hominids came out of Africa. So we chose on purpose African names for them, but they basically gave them the same names. Also, you have to realize that Genesis 1 to 11 is sort of like prehistoric history, right? It tells stories, biblical stories. It reveals stories of before literal history started. So yeah, we took the freedom to give it a slightly different cast to surprise the reader more.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
hopefully readers would get to read the read this story about God's encounter with men with a fresh perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think by doing this, especially with this part of the biblical story, we signal to the reader that this is a peculiar genre, and you shouldn't take it fully literally, but you shouldn't throw it away either. And often people make one of the two choices, and by just changing the setting, as it were, so talking about a well rather than about a tree, etc. We hope to install in the reader this sensitivity to, well, we know that there's a kind of cultural atmosphere in Genesis 2-3, which need not be taken literally, but that doesn't do away from the main message of it, and that can be very well shaped and retold in other images and storylines.
Exactly. So in that sense, it's different from in character, different from the texts about Abraham or Jesus and so.
Mm.
Yeah, that I think that works well to, like I say, you're taking the text seriously, but acknowledging that the details may not be presented in the same way or have been preserved in the same way as later details.
Yes, that's right. But even more so that by retelling the story slightly different, it makes you think actually about the story more. Because if you just tell the story as it's literally described in the Garden of Eden, then you just it resonates with what you knew already. You don't think about it, but now you start thinking about it.
Yeah,
that's a good point. And
actually,
I think
the writing process I found is one of the most interesting to think of how can we tell this story in such a way that it does justice to the biblical story and at the same time, is fitting with a possible scenario from the science. Of course, we're not claiming this is the scenario, but it's a possible scenario. And so it was a very interesting creative process there.
Yeah, it was one of them. Sorry, please go ahead, Green.
Oh, I said we have mailed a lot about this and talked a lot about this. These were very important chapters for us.
Yeah, it was a very daunting chapter. We discussed about the details here very much.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, and that comes across too. I should point out, for folks who haven't had a chance to read the book, there's a few pages towards the end of dialogue between our three authors, similar to what we're having here, and some of that collaborative process, the details of that, and what they were confronting comes across nicely in that conversation as well. So I would definitely recommend, if you haven't read the book yet, getting all the way through that part and not just ending with the main text. Especially if you've enjoyed this conversation here. So you're talking about getting a fresh perspective on the text, and the narration from the point of view of a proton also helps with that as well. You're getting a different perspective, trying to take on a different point of view, and something that becomes clear as the human portion of the narrative goes on, as we're intersecting with biblical stories and seeing what humans are doing. That this proton and his friends that are also particles have a different perspective and a different understanding of the creator than the humans do. What would you like the readers of the book to understand, maybe from trying to take on this perspective of a proton, or maybe what did you learn from trying to take on the perspective of a proton?
Well, I think Proton is very limited, of course, but he has the thing that makes him special. He's been there from the start. So our life is very short. We cannot see the past like he did. He experienced it all, and I think we can learn from Proton, not to only look at our limited life, our happiness and disappointments, but to take a step back and to see more clearly how great God is and how wonderful this creation is, and how amazing it is. God had so much patience and stepped himself into his creation. And I think it's also very special that Proton never rebels against God. I don't think he's able to sin. He's just a co-worker. He's loyal and he cannot understand God. But he does what he has to do. And from Proton's perspective, we as humans are very stupid and very limited, because we only think about ourselves and us being happy and doing what we want.
Yeah.
So how come we don't see it?
Yeah.
I think that's funny.
I think a
And to
very
say-
nice illustration of that is that in our current times, the book ends in sort of like the year now, like 2022 or so. And then Proton has a discussion with his friends. I mean, why don't they see it? And then one of his neutron friends or so says like, yeah, even these people, they're starting to complain that Jesus promised that he would come back, but well, it's 2000 years and he's not come back. And so they're losing faith. And then Proton says, what? What are you talking about? 2000 years on the 40 billion years. There's nothing. So, nice example of the perspective of the Proton.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And at the same time, he has very human-like character traits somehow. So I think readers can sympathize with Proton. At the very beginning of the book, he says something like, "I'm not so good at trusting." And I think many readers can understand that. We are not so good at trusting God. Actually, Solon, his friend, is much more steadfast. If you look carefully in the book, he knows a lot more, and he's less shaken by what is happening than Proton.
Yeah, they're emotional types, these particles.
Yeah.
Very excitable, one might say.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
As you can imagine, it was fun to write this together. This such a book. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we are at 12:30, and we're starting to get some questions coming in from the folks on the call. So I think I'm going to transition to that, to asking some of those, and maybe we'll come back. I have a few more questions that if time allows, we can come back to those. And I'm just going to go.
Andy, may we take a moment just to let people know how they can get the book in case they have to leave the conversation?
Absolutely. Thank you for reminding me of that.
That's great. No problem. Yeah. Well, the book we're talking about today is Dawn, A Proton's Tale of All That Came to Be. And it's available at InterVarsity Press. Just go to ivypress.com/dawn, and you may order it at 40% off with free shipping using the discount code 40IVCF23 at checkout. And you can actually use that for all InterVarsity Press purchases you make at the website. It's a current deal that they're having, particularly for Friends of InterVarsity and ESN. So you might enjoy visiting with that. And if you've enjoyed the conversation today, I think you'll enjoy the book even more. So with that, I'll turn it back to Andy.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm just going to take the questions from the chat as they're coming in so far, and I'll go ahead and read them out. So Dave Vosberg asks, I'm curious what the most surprising responses to the book have been so far that they've heard from readers or reviewers, and was there anything especially unexpected?
Well,
Yeah. Well, the responses were very varied. Many
varied.
people were excited about it, but well, there were also, of course, some critics for several reasons. So some thought, especially, so my part was to watch over the theological part, and some readers said, well, the theological part is actually fairly superficial in that we are just recounting the stories of the gospel and of the Bible rather than dealing with them in a historical critical way. Well, I think that was not our intention to do so. We wanted to have a kind of diatessaron, a kind of summary, gospel harmony, a summary of the Gospels, telling the story in a very accessible way, and not writing an introduction to biblical studies or biblical scholarship or something like that. So other people said it's not a literary novel. Perhaps Corinne can comment on that. I think it couldn't be, because we are explaining a lot of things. If you want to write a literary novel, you should not explain. You can only show. You should evoke things. But we had to explain a lot of things. But perhaps
and
Corinne
you
could
should
tell.
have asked another writer, because I'm not a literary writer. I'm more,
No, this was on purpose. This was an intended use.
Yeah.
Gijsbert was
Yeah.
sort of explaining we wanted to write a book for everyone, not for
Yeah.
only academics and people
I
that
can do that.
do high literature.
Yeah.
Maybe the surprising thing, I mean, there were some people that really were struck and sort of like stimulated to think about creation and Eden and the fall and things like that. But there was also in particular, I have one secular science writer in mind who found the book very strange, because the first part he enjoyed quite a bit, but then suddenly there's God and Adam and Eve and Abraham and all that, and he found that a bit artificial. And you know what? I can even sort of sympathize with that a bit, in the sense the whole book writing. And for example, when I reread the book in the English translation, because we wrote it first in Dutch, it was translated, I reread it in English translation. I can understand him a little bit, because it is strange that God exposes himself to mankind, that there is an incarnation. It's a strange story. It is a strange story, but yet it happens. And it happened in space and time, in actual material reality. And so, yeah, that strangeness comes across in the book, because you have to write down the story in physical detail. There was the incarnation where a baby was born and the baby was crying and drinking milk from the mother. And that was the Son of God. I mean, and that is in the story. And that struck that secular journalist as very strange. And it strikes me as very strange, and it is very strange, but it is still true. It still happened in space and time. Yeah.
And I would not go along with the suggestion that the book is incoherent, in that the first part can be the very first pages we mentioned the creator already.
Oh,
so,
yeah, sure.
So it's a unity, I would say. Yeah.
It is, yes,
I can maybe sympathize a little bit with, as a scientist and somebody who enjoys a lot of science writing, that transition, if you're really into the scientific details, it might become as unexpected. But certainly I understand all the reasons why you just elaborated why you wrote it that way.
Well, but there's an important point, because people claim to write science books, but quite too often, if Stephen Hawking write a book about brief history of time, there's also metaphysical concepts coming along and claims to be made, right? Claims that are made. So it's not just science books. Sapiens or something like that. Books like that, they carry also metaphysical notions, and this is important to acknowledge. And so I'm not sure there are pure science books. Maybe there are, but yeah, it's rare in this category.
Right.
Yeah, as soon as you get this big history, then you get metaphysics at the same time, I would say.
Exactly.
And we try to do this as explicit as possible. Yeah.
We are open about it. We do that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Carrie Johnson writes, she sounds like the book was a lot of fun, or he writes that the book was a lot of fun to write, and look forward to reading it, and asks, do you incorporate much of the physics of protons, and is Pro a quantum mechanical creature?
Oh, that's a question for me, I think. Yeah. Sorry, I was reading the question from Eng-Jung Lee. Sorry. Yes, of course. I mean, it's like in quantum mechanics. A particle that size is both you can describe it as a material object, an atom, a billiard ball, but you can also describe it as a wave. We don't go too much into the nature of it. We just describe it as a character that is there, and we don't go in full detail. I mean, there's so many scientific details to be described. We keep it at a rather grand scheme rather than go into the nature of many of these things.
Yeah, it had to be readable for non-academic readers too. So
Yeah, but we try to convey it. I mean, it's certainly consistent with that picture, but it's not like very explicit about it. Is that a satisfying answer? Please speak up if it's not, right? Or you have a follow-up question.
Yeah, go ahead. I will keep an eye on for follow-up questions in the chat, but in the meantime, we can move on. The next question also comes from David Bosberg, wants to know if this book would be a good choice to read aloud as a family, in your opinion, and if you have a recommended minimum age for a reader or a listener to this story.
It's for Corine.
Well, I think from an age of 10, kids could be very interested because it's a very interesting story. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about fair.
There is actually an audio version of the book. So you could even buy the audio version and have that read out automatically in the podcast or something.
Yeah. So when you're in the car, your kids can listen to and you can listen yourself. It's very fun to listen to all those different voices, accents. It's really
Okay.
very, very nice.
On that topic, I see that the translator, Harry Cook, has chimed in, has joined us and has chimed in the chat that the book was fun to translate. There were no $2 words, and the book was great for me to read. I don't know if we can add him to the audio conversation if he wants to chime in anymore, but thanks for being here and adding that observation.
Harry, if you're okay with that, we can unmute you and spotlight you as well. Harry, you'll need to unmute yourself.
I'm fine where I am. Good morning to some, good evening to others, and it was so much fun to participate in that. My wife always tells me, Harry, you think you were one of the authors the way you are always talking about this book, and I'm quite aware that I'm not. But one good experience I had, and I'll just leave it at that, I sent the link to Dawn IVP to as many people as I could. And one person said, I would love to have my brother translated into Portuguese. And I thought it was so moving. I don't know, maybe it should be translated from Dutch into Portuguese, but maybe it works from English to Portuguese. Yeah.
Would be great.
And thank you so much, Harry. It's so beautiful to hear your book in English words. It's very
No $2 words. No $2 words. Just do the same thing that Corine did.
Yeah.
Great. Well, you know, it's neat to see just how much of a collaboration this project was and how much everybody enjoyed it and was engaged with it. We have one other line of discussion in the chat. That's a little bit of a tangent, but perhaps Casey, you'd like to tell a little bit more of the story about this art project at your church and the resulting image.
Yeah, I was trying to actually put it in. I can actually share screen. I can show you.
Oh, great.
If you enable me. I'm just looking at quickly. And yeah. Yeah. If you did you enable?
Let me take care of that.
There was I'm a part of an evangelical church. It's a Pentecostal church that more became a sort of mainstream evangelical church. I'm a worship leader there. I'm an evangelical Christian because I love Jesus, and my faith centers very much on that. And we have art. I organized some art projects, and that was also on the aspect of the brokenness of the world and how that relates to our faith. And we made different things, and I made the digital composition, which I can show you. I think.
Okay, you should be able to do that now.
That's right. Here you go. All right. Do you see something now?
Yeah,
we do.
Right. You see actually the Earth, the galaxy, and on the top right, you see the Big Bang galaxy forming, and the bottom right, you see the Earth forming with the origin of life, with molecules, and on the left of that, you see the face of Jesus in all of that. This was just an art piece that I made, and actually through all of that, it's broken, right? On that, so I this was just a big thing, and we printed this 2 by 2 meters or something, and it was on one of the walls of my church at some point, and that was it. Yeah, what's more to tell about it? I mean, we had many art objects in that thing, and it was. I love art, and this is just an expression of what we can, tell our stories to help see all that. And yeah, it's the same theme of dawn and this whole part of integrating. I'm a scientist. I'm doing front floor research and doing good research at the forefront of nanobiology, sort of like DNA sequencing and all that. And at the same time, I'm evangelical Christian. And I want to show the people that this goes together in a very harmonious way. And I do this in all types of things, in the books, but also in art projects and just by living my life. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, that image is very apropos of the story and the book of Dawn. I don't see any other questions in the chat. If somebody sees something that I overlooked, please let me know. But in the interim,
John Milholland, he had his hand raised already early on. Maybe he wanted to ask a question. I don't know.
Sure. My apologies. I didn't see his.
There was a hand raised. Like, I mean, at least on my screen, it's his hand raised. But
right. I must have different people in my view, but.
Okay. I have encouraged by Bob Truby tried to summarize it for the chat, but basically, as I see what you've done is, for the first time, broken the image of God as a potter working with clay. I don't know if others have been troubled by, especially in the scientific community, been troubled by the metaphor God as a potter working with clay. When we have that image in mind, God is literally making finished creatures. But by starting with the proton, by starting with the minuscule, what you've done, in my view, is open the conversation to what does it mean and what are the theological implications for seeing God as being a constant creator using creative processes that are quote unquote uncontrollable.
Yeah.
So I see what you're doing as opening, shall we say, almost a floodgate of new conversation, helping people, especially today, who are educated enough in science to know that we might come out of our mother's wombs as fully created creatures, but whenever we're at the doctor's office, they're looking for small stuff. They're looking for all of the creative and minuscule processes that are going on. I wanted to say this because every time that I've talked about this with other people, it just gets complicated. People don't seem to understand. But to me, by focusing on the proton, you've started a conversation that has lots of implications and future developments.
Yeah, for me, it's a very natural thing to think of God as being involved in the creative process as a process. I mean, when an artist is making a pot from clay, it's a process. It's not the clay the pot is not there right in one sweep, but it's a process where you start with a clump of clay and slowly morphs that into an art object. And yeah, it's the same thing here. God creates material, energy, and all that, but then starts shaping it into galaxies, into animals, into humans, and is involved in that whole process. So the view underlying Dawn is not a deistic view, but a theistic view, where God is involved at every nanosecond of this billions of years in this process.
Yeah, so as a theologian, I would add that this metaphor of God as making humans from clay comes from Genesis 2:3 again, of course, and it's often taken literally by young Earth creationists and others. And I don't think that's doing justice to the text. But what it does try to convey is that God takes great care in human beings to emerge. He puts all his creativity in it, in a sense, and he looks into the finest details, like artists do when they create pottery. And so for me, this metaphor, even though it can come with questionable overtones, does continue to have a sound meaning and significance. In that it testifies of God's deep love and care for us humans to eventually evolve.
I think the additional point, though, I'm trying to get at is that God might be the potter working with clay, but he's working with pieces that have freedom.
Yeah.
So the issue of freedom then becomes in my view, becomes a very much more important part of the theological conversation.
Yeah.
Because the freedom we see then all the way down to the level of the proton, the cell, the organ in our bodies, whatever it might be. So it just, maybe I should leave it there.
Yeah, I think it's clear what you want to say, and I think we agree with that. That freedom, especially when it comes to the human being, is a very important part of the story.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so when I reread the book again, I was struck by many of the details again. So and I think that we have to compliment Corinne especially for that, because she was very creative here, and some of the details are so funny, and also the metaphors which are being used are sometimes, I think, just very elucidating. And so you can look into the whole storyline, but you can also, I would say, learn from the details. For example, when she's describing the process of nuclei forming from helium moving to form carbon, then she says it's going like popcorn in a popper, and that's exactly the right metaphor, I believe. And so it's very funny to. Oh, is that from K? I don't know where it come from, but it struck me as a very nice metaphor. So I think we can be happy that the issue of the role of metaphors in Dawn was brought up, because that's a peculiar aspect of it as well.
Okay, as we're I think we're starting to wind down based on the time that we're at. But that brings up another question that I've been wondering, and you've already kind of touched on this, and maybe Corinne or Case has examples of things that you learned from the process of writing this book, things that you took away from it, or a fresh perspective, or just some details that you enjoyed from the book itself or from the collaboration process.
Well, for me, one of the eye-openers was that we are all made of stardust. So every particle of our bodies has been there from the Big Bang till this day. So in a way, we were part of this great event. We are made of matter made 14 billion years ago. I think that's fascinating.
So yeah. So I was struck by the many consonances between science and faith, and they were never so clear to me as when working on this book. For example, a passage which is also very dear to me is, and again, this was from one of my two co-authors. It came from one of my two co-authors. Is also in the very beginning when these all these quarks are there, and then anti-quarks rise into existence, and there's a clash, and there's only a very tiny part of the quarks which survive, and then Proton says, what a waste. And then some of his friends says, no, it's not waste, it's abundance. And that resonates so deeply with the gospel to me, where there's also a lot of abundance in the way in which God behaves and Christ behaves, etc. And there are many of these resonances in the story, the scientific story on the one hand, and the biblical story on the other, which touched my heart.
Nice. For me, it was like, I said it already, the fresh look to become again triggered to think of what it means that God became man, that God revealed himself in space and time to us. I mean, it's the Psalm 8 type of feeling, right? Who am I that God cares about all this stuff here? Like amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. One thing, the theme of abundance and waste, I'm reminded, I think it's the book and the movie Contact, they talk about the vastness of the cosmos, and if we're alone in the cosmos, what a waste that would be. But you can look at that as abundance as well. Something, and perhaps this is naive of me, but something that has come to my mind, and I'm reminded of it because of the proton in your book. If you were a proton in a bubble chamber, these devices that are used by physicists to study particles, you might see that bubble, the enormity of that bubble chamber relative to your dimensions as quite a waste or quite an abundance. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes wonder if our relationship to the cosmos is similar, that this is the scale that it takes for God to be able to.
Yeah, and that resonates also in the book. I mean, especially because of Corinne, I would say it's her credit, but every stage in the evolution of life, cosmic and biological evolution, there is a new environment opening up. And then Pro thinks, oh, this must be the plan of God to establish the oceans, and here we're free to float and this and that. And then there's yet another stage and yet another stage. And it's this remarkable, daunting complexity.
Yeah, even in the very first second, Pro is already very satisfied. He thinks that's it. It's all meant for him to be there.
Yeah.
Because it's already a second, right?
Yeah, so many eons have passed already.
Yeah. And in the final chapter of the book invites us to take the next step, right? Thinking ahead about that this isn't the end either, that there will be another another stage, another environment that will open up to us going forward.
Yeah, that's a biblical notion, of course, as well.
Of course, but it's also a nice, a nice way to end the story or wrap up the story to remind us of that invitation.
Maybe we should we shouldn't do a spoiler, but it ends on that discussion on abundance and waste again, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of wrapping things up, I think we've hit the time that we tried to wrap things up. Is that?
Well, we just want to let you know one more time how to pick up a copy of the book that we've been hearing about for the last hour. The book is called Dawn, A Proton's Tale of All That Came to Be. It's available at IntervarsityPress.com/Dawn, and you can purchase it at 40% off with free shipping by using the code 40IVCF23 at checkout. And this information is in the chat for you. We do want to let you know about our next conversation as well. Our next conversation is on the thrill of orthodoxy with Trevin Wax. Every generation faces the temptation to wander from orthodoxy and to seek out the jolt that comes with false teaching and to drift with current cultural currents. And so every generation must be awakened again to the thrill of orthodoxy and experience the astonishment that comes from stumbling afresh upon the electrifying paradoxes at the heart of Christian faith. And that's what Trevin Wax explores in this book. He's the Vice President of Research and Resource Development at the North American Mission Board, a visiting professor at Cedarville University, and a former missionary to Romania. So we hope that you will consider joining us for our next ESN conversation. That is going to be on November 17th, 2022 at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can sign up for it at ESN Orthodox, tinyurl.com/ESN Orthodoxy. So we hope you will join us for that. Finally, we want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank our 3 authors who via Zoom have come to us from the Netherlands today. And thank you for taking out time in your early evening to be with us. We want to thank Andy Walsh for doing our interview today. And we really appreciate Andy's involvement with that, as well as his ongoing contributions to the Emerging Scholars Network. We do want to acknowledge InterVarsity Press, the publisher in English of this book, and thank them for their work in helping set up this conversation. And we hope that for those of you who maybe are encountering the Emerging Scholars Network for the first time, we do want to invite you to join us by visiting our blog, where there's a join link at blog.emergingscholars.org. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ESN IVCF. And you might visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ESN IVCF. This conversation will probably be posted within the day or two at that channel. And you can also, by subscribing, receive notifications whenever any new conversations are posted. So with that, we want to thank you for joining us, and we will conclude our conversation and stop our recording.